Hello, everyone. I think you can see me. My name is Richard Clubley, and I shall be talking about my new book, Orkney, A Special Way of Life. If you just give me a second whilst I share the screen and start the PowerPoint presentation, and then we'll get cracking. Should be that. I found this quote a few days ago. I thought I would share it with you this evening. I was in search of distant islands, in love with the idea that on a patch of land protected by a circumference of sea, the obligations and irritations of life would dissolve and a single clarity of mind would descend. It proved more complicated than that, which I think is certainly true of if anybody's contemplating a move to island living. I said the talk tonight and the book, in fact, is called Orkney, A Special Way of Life. So I want to try and pick out the features of living here that characterize the way of life. And the first thing to notice is the extreme northness of Orkney in respect of the UK. So let's just have a look and see where Orkney is. Here's the map of Scotland with the Scottish-English border down here, Glasgow, Edinburgh, and then way up here Inverness, the most northerly big city, and then all the way up the A9 to Thurso before you take ferry to Stromness and Orkney. People talk about the Orkney Islands or any Scottish islands as being remote, and they are remote, it's true, from the large centres of population. There's Edinburgh and Glasgow down there, but they're not remote for the people that live here. This is a map of the Orkney Islands. There's about 74 different islands, of which about 18 are inhabited. This big one in the middle is called, oddly enough, mainland. We don't refer to mainland as the Scottish or the UK mainland. Anything below Orkney is just referred to as south or south. This island here is called mainland, and we live on it. X marks the spot. Our house is there, overlooking the huge natural harbour of Scapa Flow. When we start to think about the northness of Orkney, we have to look for a few clues that indicate its northness, and this picture is one of them. This is the train line. These are the buffers at the very northern end of the UK railroad at Thurso. So you can travel to Orkney by train. When you get off at Thurso, it's just a couple of miles to the ferry, and then you can cross to Orkney. Or you can drive. This is my car parked on the side of the A9 in the Cairngorms. One time I was driving up and pulled over to photograph the snow. The A9 road is known as a lifeline road, and the authorities, as you can see, work very, very hard to keep it clear because it is the only road in and out of Orkney at times of snow, and very important for the inhabitants that it stays open. Once you get to Thurso, you can take ship and travel to Scrabster. There's also a route via Aberdeen, a route via Gills Bay. But this is my favourite. This is Scrabster near Thurso, across to Stromness, and with the opportunity to view the old Man of Hoy. That's the rock stack, 467 feet sticking up at the base of the cliffs there. It used to be attached to the cliff, but erosion has separated it, and it's now a rock stack. And doesn't matter what time of day or night, year or season that you cross, there's always a few folk out on deck who haven't seen it before or want to see it again. It's a real sort of gatekeeper for the approach to Stromness. You can fly. We have an international airport. You can get flights from Edinburgh, Glasgow, Aberdeen, Inverness, sometimes from Manchester. Or you can walk. There were two ladies in the 1950s who set off from Somerset and walked to Orkney, carrying all their belongings in a tea chest on wheels. And when they got there, they rented this house, which looked like that at the time. And they worked on it and restored it and lived in it for 30 years before age and infirmity caught up with them, and they moved to Orkney mainland, and the house has slipped back into ruin again. But all of these things, I think, help to give you the idea that we are in relation to the UK, we are a long way north. Anyway, in 2016, my wife Bev and I decided we'd come and live here. So we bought a plot of land, and here it is, with the very beginnings of our driveway and some excavations taking place for the building of our house. And this is the view from our back kitchen window overlooking Scapa Flow. This is Scapa Flow here. This little island here is Carver. It's uninhabited at present, but the house I just showed you where the two ladies lived was just over the hilltop there. They lived on Carver, which, apart from themselves and I think one other for a while, was uninhabited. It's now totally uninhabited. Students of history amongst you will know that the German fleet was interned in Scapa Flow during the First World War, the end of the First World War, and most of the ships were in this stretch of water here and round the corner, the other side of Carver there, and there's still about 5 huge battleships sunk just in that stretch of water there, and the dive boats come out regularly to go down and inspect them. And again, just on the subject of northness, if you look at these mountains here, they're the Scaraban Mountains in Caithness. They are 50 miles away, and I'm constantly amazed that even on slightly hazy days we can see them. So I think when I'm looking south to, and I'm thinking I'm looking south to Caithness, that really does make me think I'm in the north. Here's our house almost completed, packing up from our home in Derbyshire to travel. There's a double entendre in the packing label there. I'll leave you to work out what the two meanings are. And here we are with the house completed. This was our first spring. So the poppies are, in 2018, the poppies are flowering, which they are now. So this photograph must have been taken in around about May, June of 2018. It's a very modern house. Building regulations here are incredibly strict. There's lots of insulation in it, so it doesn't need much heating. But I insisted to the builder we have a wood burning stove, because I just like wood burning stoves, and he said, you don't need one. And I said, well, I want one. And he said, well, if you can have one, but if you have one and you light it, you'll have to sit in your underpants. I said, well, I want one. And so it proved, if we burn any more than 2 logs on that fire in the evening and the house is too hot, and then it stays hot all night. But it's lovely, and it gives us the reassurance that should the electric air source heat pump break down, we can at least heat the house. Now, I promised you an insight into the way of life in Orkney, and I think the way of life anywhere is often influenced, if not governed, by local councils. So I'll just tell you a little bit about Orkney's local council. I don't wish to impugn the council in any way, shape or form. I'm sure they're no better or worse than councils anywhere, but a couple of council stories might illustrate that the way of life in Orkney is not the rural idyll. It's not without its problems, and in many ways it's got the same problems that you have wherever you're living. When we arrived and moved into our house in September 2017, we had no dustbins. So I spent part of almost every day going backwards and forwards to the council tip with all the cardboard boxes from our unpacking and also our domestic rubbish. And after a couple of weeks, I phoned the council and asked if we could have some dustbins. And they said, has your poll tax been finalised yet? I said, no, it hasn't. And they said, well, you can't have dustbins until your poll tax is finalised. Anyway, another 2 weeks went past, still no dustbins. Phoned the council. Has your poll tax been finalised yet? No, it hasn't. Well, you can't have dustbins till your poll tax is finalised. I said, when the poll tax is finalised, will we absolutely definitely get dustbins? Oh, yes, absolutely, guaranteed. And I said, is there any possibility we won't have to pay poll tax? And they said, oh, no, absolutely none whatsoever. So I said, well, in that case, then we're absolutely guaranteed to get dustbins. Yes. I said, well, why can't we have them now? No, you can't have dustbins till your poll tax is agreed. Okay. So that was I thought, typically council circular argument. Anyway, we got the dustbins, and the first day we put them out, it was blowing a gale. So we secured them to the gate like this, and they weren't collected. Our dustbins haven't been collected. No, you infringed the dustbin etiquette. That was the actual word they used. We have a dustbin etiquette, and you're not allowed to secure them. So I said, well, what happens when it's a gale then? Oh, I don't know. Do I have to stand at the end of the drive and hold the bin till the lorry arrives? No. I said, well, it'll blow away and all the rubbish will go all over the road. Well, you can't secure them. So after a while, I discovered there was no official policy for putting your dustbin out in a gale. So I built, along with many of my neighbours, it has to be said, this little bin store, which protects the bin from just about anything under a force 10. You can see I've got the chain hanging there for in case the wind gets up to force 11. So that's life under a council regime. And here is a little bit of the weather. This particular day was quite mild, but you can see the spray from the sea. Even though the sea is fairly calm, there's spray reaching almost up to the top of those cliffs. That's Marwick Head, with the Kitchener Memorial on top of it. And for a bit more spray, this is just further along the cliff at Yesnaby. Interestingly, the locals are as fascinated, the natives, I should say, the people who've lived here for a long time, are as fascinated by the weather as the visitors and the incomers. They'll often dash out during gales to see if they can get some wave action on their cameras. This was at Yesnaby. Hundreds of feet high, the cliffs there, about 400 feet high. And here's Bev, my wife, in the foreground with mother-in-law behind, holding onto her hood, and dog, again at Yesnaby. Basically, women in Orkney have three choices of hairstyle. They're known as northwest or southeast or short. This was in the early days. Bev's still sporting the southwest hairstyle, but she now has it cut much shorter and is less troubled by the wind. But I shouldn't leave you with the impression that the weather in Orkney is bad. It isn't. We do get some wind, but not out of the way, nothing that can't be survived or even enjoyed at times. And we also get many calm days. This was a calm winter dawn from the back window, the geese taking off against the sunrise. I like the geese. They make good photographs apart from anything else. The farmers don't like them very much because they damage the grass. This is another winter dawn. These colours are quite typical. I could take this photograph on any one of several days during the winter. We're not so well endowed here for sunsets, because outside the north side of our house is the largest hill on mainland, so that if we want to see a sunset, we either have to go to the top of the hill or around it. But if we do go to the top of the hill or around it, the sunsets are equally gorgeous. I think there's been a lot said, particularly during the COVID times, about wellness and well-being and health and mental health, and particularly access to nature. People have started to realize that being able to access nature has a tremendous beneficial effect on our well-being. Doctors have even started to prescribe or suggest patients join walking clubs or outdoor clubs, so that rather than prescribe pharmaceuticals. There's even a company, Kylo, in Orkney, which has about 25 employees, which I noticed in the paper recently, decided to give, I don't know whether this is every month, but it decided to give its employees half a day off per month to go out and enjoy the outdoors, because they figured that, you know, keeps them well, keeps the employees well and in good spirits, and that's good for everybody. One of the things we can do in Orkney is interact with nature in such a way that, you know, it must be difficult to beat anywhere in the UK. And here's me interacting with nature in the field below the house. And that's another field below the house. The village we live in, Orfa, is kind of a straggle of houses along the road there. Our house is just off the picture, I think. But the opportunity to interact with nature, and also to make a point of realizing that you're interacting with nature and to appreciate it is very important. So easy to start taking these things for granted. This is a walk, one of my favorite walks along the shore at Stromness, with the island of Hoy on the left there. And again, opportunity to interact with nature. And the sea is never far away. You're never more than about 3 miles from the sea in Orkney, and usually a lot closer than that. So looking out to sea, you know, calm day, rough day, still day, great uplift to the spirit. More interacting with nature, some Atlantic grey, an Atlantic grey seal with her pup hard fast asleep. We can take these photographs during the pupping season in the autumn from the top of the cliff. This photograph was taken from the top of a cliff, quite a long way from the seal. So I don't think we were in any danger of invading its territory. Nevertheless, I think you can see that the mum probably knew we were there. And everybody's favourite, the puffins. We have about 40,000 puffins in Orkney at this time of year. Unfortunately, about 39,550 live on the tiny uninhabited island of Sulskerry, which is 32 miles out into the Atlantic. But there are enough on the islands for us to go and photograph. We went out to the Broch of Bursey on Sunday and saw 7. So the visitors can see them. We also have beaches, which are generally uncrowded. This beach is just on the edge of the town of Kirkwall, and on a fine sunny day, still uncrowded. If you get more than half a dozen people on there, then that's unusual. Scapa Distillery, I don't know whether the whiskey contributes to the way of life. I guess it does. Whether it contributes to the wellness, I guess it does, depending on your point of view. And another beach with colours. I love these colours, the turquoise of the sea and the green and the blue. Incomparable. The light, the very quality of the light itself in Orkney is incomparable as well, which gives us these super colours. Orkney has probably been lived on continuously for about 10,000 years. The Mesolithic hunter-gatherers came here as soon as the ice retreated 10 or 11,000 years ago, but they left very, very few traces. There are very, very few traces of a way of life in Orkney until about 5,000 years ago, when the Stone Age or Neolithic farmers first arrived and built stone houses like this one. This one, in fact, this is Nap of Hower on the island of Papawestre, one of Orkney's more northerly islands. And the thing that's special about Nap of Hower is that it is the oldest existing house in northwest Europe. Most of what we have in Orkney is about 5,000 years old. This is about 5,500 years old. Oldest existing house in northwest Europe. We think that this structure here was a house, and that maybe as few as 3 or 4 years later, the inhabitants built on a smaller structure, which we think was a workshop, had its own front door through there. But there was also a connecting passageway between the two. It doesn't look like it in this picture, but interestingly, the workshop is detached. It has its own wall under the grassy bank there, and the house has its own wall under the grassy bank here. Quite why they built it detached, I don't know. They certainly wouldn't have had to worry about noise from stereos or power tools or anything like that. It seems to me they would have saved a lot of work by using the wall, single wall. Somebody has suggested that maybe in the Neolithic mind, a building wasn't a building unless it had four walls. Don't know. But certainly this broad dividing wall here would have been a good support for roof struts. They wouldn't have been able to span the entire two buildings with a single roof. Roof would have been spanned by timber poles, possibly whale bones, and then thatched or covered in hides. We don't know, because none of that survived. Certainly wasn't roofed with stone slabs. Had it been roofed with stone slabs, they would have still been there in the floor, and they weren't, so we're not sure. Incidentally, just over there, you can see the island of Westray poking into the picture. At the time when the Neolithic folk lived here, that would have been a walk. The water level has risen enormously, about 30 meters since that time. So that would have been a walk. Jumping ahead, almost 5,000 years to the 19th century, we see another aspect of the way of life in Orkney. The way of life in Orkney has been and still is very much a seafaring way of life. And the man that lived in this house was John Ray, Dr. John Ray, who became an Arctic explorer for the Hudson Bay Company from the town of Stromness. This is the beginning of the town of Stromness here. And over the centuries, many seafarers have left from Stromness to go off and explore the world and fish and so on. Stromness was a major staging post for ships coming up the east coast of the UK. And then heading west, they would call in at Stromness for fresh supplies, fresh water, and often pick up extra crew members. And the Orcadians became well known as competent seafarers, and much sought after by ships heading to the Canadian Arctic. This house, by the way, Hall of Clestron, has been bought by the newly formed John Ray Society, and they are in the process of raising funds to restore it as a memorial to John Ray, and as a bit of a exhibition centre and museum and so on. Another way of life that didn't last very long, but was very important during the Second World War, was the stationing of about 40,000 service personnel in Orkney. Population of Orkney then was, and as now, was around about 20,000, but an additional 40,000 came, sailors, airmen and soldiers, to garrison the islands during the Second World War, and they needed entertaining. So across the island there were a few of these structures. This is a 1,200 seat cinema, which was built to very high standards and entertained, or troops were entertained here by the likes of Gracie Fields and George Formby and others. Italian prisoners of war came to Orkney and were held in two camps on a couple of tiny islands just off mainland, and they built this chapel known as the Italian Chapel, and it was built entirely from scrap material, two Nissen huts placed end to end and decorated inside entirely by the prisoners from scrap materials they were given. One of the prisoners was an exceptional artist, and he created this by copying a postcard that his mum had given him when he went to war, which he carried in his jacket pocket throughout the war. When the war ended and they were allowed to go home, Domenico Chiacchetti said, "Well, I can't go yet. I haven't finished the chapel." So he stayed on for a few weeks to finish the chapel, and then came back in 1960 to do a little bit of restoration work, which still goes on, and links between the Orcadians and the Italians exist to this day. There's always a few come every year, families of the men that were here. One of the things the way of life in Orkney, the farming way of life, gives us is no shortage of land. So when houses fall out of use or towards the end, get to the end of their useful life, instead of knocking them down and building on the plot, which would have to happen in a city, quite often the farmers just move 100 yards away, build a new house, and the old house becomes a byre or a tractor shed or a ladder store or something. So in the landscape dotted about, you'll see these, I think, rather beautiful and poignant reminders of days gone by that that add to the scenery and reminders of a former life in Orkney. A lot of people ask what the major jobs are for people in Orkney. Well, the principal industry in Orkney is farming. It is a farming community. The vast majority of the land is given over to farming. And these are our neighbours that we see and hear sometimes in the early morning out of our front window. And these are our back window neighbours. So lots of farming, sheep and cattle, and a little bit of barley grown for the fodder and grass for silage as well, and vegetables for mostly for consumption on the islands. Fishing is an important industry, mostly shell fishing rather than whitefish, but here's a fishing boat coming into Stromness Harbour with a couple of one side of the harbour is formed by these two low islands called the Homes, which can be walked to at low tide. If you'd have been here a year or so ago, you possibly could have bought these two islands for about 350,000 pounds. There's a house on them just off picture there. So, you know, there is land for sale in Orkney. I heard of 150 acres that was on sale on the island of Grahamsea last week. 150 acres for the principal sum of £95,000. Fishing boats in Stromness Harbour. But the other thing that one should not lose sight of is the incredibly modern industries we have in Orkney, principally to do with renewable energy, wave and tidally generated electricity, come together, and a number of support companies. Here we are at the Orkney Research and Innovation Campus with a number of high-tech industries, particularly EMEC, European Marine Energy Centre there, heavily involved with research and development into wave power and tidal power. Heriot-Watt University, Robert Gordon University have outposts here, and various marine-based companies. Tourism's important. This was at the start of the season, which of course was late this year because of COVID, but tourism is picking off. When I was past this campsite the other day, it was full of camper vans. And people always want to know where we get our food. I like to tease them by saying, well, you know, we can go down onto the shore and collect shellfish. And if we've got a kind farmer neighbour, we might get given a bit of food, or go down to the harbour and get a fish off a fishing boat. But actually, most of the time, we can just go to this big Tesco and get what we need. Other supermarkets are available. We have lots of facilities. This is our leisure centre, the Picacoy Centre. The airport I've already mentioned. We have a super new hospital, which was opened, well, started working in 2019, but was officially opened by the Royal Highnesses, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, a couple of weeks ago. They paid a flying visit to Orkney and opened the hospital. And I think the hospital, more than anything, is indicative of the modern way of life we have. If you are a young Orcadian couple with perhaps 2 young children, wondering whether to stay in the islands or accept a job in the south, and you're weighing up the pros and cons, you need not have any fears about staying in Orkney for a young family. The health service, the education service, the safety, the facilities, the sport, the leisure are all here and in good quality. Similarly, if you're a young family in the south, perhaps offered a job in Orkney, and you're trying to weigh up the pros and cons, you need have no fear about coming to live here. Everything you need will be provided. Maybe not the same massive choice that you have in a big city, but certainly you can buy just about anything here. When we got our building plot, I wanted to check that it was the correct size, that we were actually getting the amount of land we'd been promised. So I went into a builder's merchant to buy a builder's tape, and there were 4 different models to choose from. And I thought, well, if there's 4 different builder's tapes to choose from, it must be possible to buy most things here. And so it has proved. This is Kirkwall Grammar School on the right, with Orkney Theatre on the left, which is attached to the school, used by the school during the day, and then becomes a public theatre for use in the evenings. Being an island community, I remember I said 74 islands, of which about 18 are inhabited. Many of the children on the outer islands need to come to mainland for their secondary education, so they have to stay in the hostel during the week. School starts a little bit later, I think, on Monday mornings, and it finishes at lunchtime on Fridays, so that island children can get back to their islands, catch the boat or the plane back to their islands. In the event of bad weather closing in on the Friday and they can't get back to the islands, every child has a pre-arranged bolt hole, either with relatives or friends, parents, so that they've got somewhere safe to go during the weekend. But this is the new hall of residence just next door to the secondary school in Kirkwall. And here's one of the island schools. This is Stronsay. This is the entire school population on Stronsay that I visited one day. I like to interview the students for my books, and all my Orkney, well, both of my Orkney books have got chapters in where the students tell me what they thought. You can always rely on children to tell you the truth, and I find that quite reassuring. But there, how about that for a playground for your children? And how about that for a view if you're a teacher? Not bad, not bad. No problems there with particulate matter in the air, and lots of nice clean air to breathe. These are the inter-island ferries, not the ferries that you arrive on when you come to Orkney. These are the ferries that carry you about the islands between mainland and Stronsay and Sanday and so on. Getting a bit old now, a bit long in the tooth, needing replacement, which they will be presently. And the hope is that the new ferries will be hydrogen powered. The surplus wind power that we have, and we do have surplus wind power, Orkney is more than self-sufficient in electricity from the wind power. The surplus wind energy can be used to generate hydrogen gas from seawater. And hydrogen gas can be stored, then it can be put into tanks and used to power ferries. There are already 1 or 2 cars running about the island running on hydrogen. The great thing about hydrogen is that it is totally clean. The exhaust gas contains water vapor only. So no greenhouse gas problems with hydrogen. And the book's about the way of life, so I should tell you about my current way of life. It's summed up in this picture, I think, probably as well as anything. Remember, I write about Scottish Islands, not just books, but magazine articles and blogs and so on. And here I am on the island of Fairy, which is uninhabited, doing a bit of research. This is research that you see in action here on a sunny day. This is the old schoolhouse on Fairy, which is still just about habitable, and the shepherds use it when they go out to check the lambs. in the spring, and I used it for a bit of rest one lunchtime. Not quite sure why there was an Arga outside. Don't know if it was liberated from the house with the intention of taking it somewhere else and it never got there, or whether it was delivered to the house and never got fitted. But anyway, I thought it made an interesting photograph. So my way of life is working hard, as you can see, researching islands for stories, and there's plenty of appetite for island stories and Orkney stories in Orkney. This is the Orcadian bookshop in Kirkwall, and you can see, if you read along the top of those bookcases, 6 shelves full of Orkney books. Books on history, archaeology, wildlife, cookery, fiction, maps, birds, wildflowers, you name it, children's literature. I always think one need never have any qualms about writing another book about Orkney, because hopefully there is an endless appetite for books about Orkney. I have a little boat which sees me out and about on calm days, and I can get to uninhabited places. This is Carver again, the one I told you about earlier. It's just across the water from our house. So I popped across there one day and landed just to have a little look around. When I was writing my first book about Orkney, I wrote a chapter about the lifeboat, and in doing so, met the manager of the lifeboat station and interviewed him and got lots of information from him. And when I'd finished the book, he said, or just as I was finishing the book, he said, "When do you finish that book?" And I said, "Well, probably today or tomorrow." He said, "Good." He said, "You don't know anybody who would write us a booklet about the lifeboat, do you?" Hint, hint. So I said, "Well, I'll have a go if you like." And I'd already written a chapter about the lifeboat. So rather than duplicate it, I adapted it to make this booklet for the lifeboat so they could sell it to raise funds. Now, having done that, I then got roped in to be the press officer for the lifeboat, which was a great privilege, great honor. So I'm now the press officer for Stromness Lifeboat, which means I get to now and again go out for a spin on the Violet, Dorothy and Kathleen. And here I am with my super Samuel the Lifeboatman kit on. In 2019, which was the 80th anniversary of the sinking of the battleship Royal Oak in Scapa Flow, and the lifeboat went out to the wreath laying ceremony. Because it was 80 years, they had a bit more of a ceremony than usual. There's a ceremony every year, but this time they made a little bit more of it. And a Royal Navy minesweeper came to lay the reef. And I was lucky enough to be on the lifeboat. Just privileges like this, you know, I suppose you've got to live long enough, but tremendous privilege to be involved with the lifeboat. And it's a big part of my way of life now. But that's as nothing. That's a fairly relaxed lifestyle, you know, wandering about, writing about islands, a fairly relaxed lifestyle compared to Bev, my wife. True, she is 10 years younger than me, so she should be more energetic. The only way I can tell you about Bev's lifestyle is to do a timetable for you. So this is what I've done. There's no exaggeration in this timetable. This is more or less how she fills her week. She when she arrived in Orkney, her big concern was that she wouldn't have enough to do, and all the locals said, "Well, don't worry about that. Your problem will be fitting it all in." So within about 6 months, she was saying to me, "Do you think I've taken on too much?" Well, after 6 months, she hadn't, but now after 4 years, we're getting to the point where, you know, if she takes anything else on, I'm going to have to miss my pizza on Saturday night. As it is, I have to call into her cafe on a Friday for a coffee if I want to chat to her. But anyway, you can see quite a few things: running and volunteering with the Red Cross and the children's panel. And unfortunately, most of this work is voluntary, so it's only the waitressing at the cafe that gets paid. But never mind, she's retired, so she's entitled. to do that. And here she is. This is one of the activities, singing in the choir in St Magnus Cathedral. There she is, carefully following the music. This is having received a medal for a run on Rousey, serving coffee at the cafe, marshalling people at the vaccination centre. The school teacher comes out in her there, you know, telling people where to go and where to sit and when to talk and when not to. Quite a few people have said to her, "Did you used to be a school teacher?" And she said, "Yes." And they've said, "I thought so." And gardening. We installed a polycrub. This is a polycrub. It's a tough greenhouse, tough frame with thick, tough polycarbonate sheets to stand up to the Orkney wind. So we've started gardening as well now. And that's us. That's our way of life on Orkney and the way of life of a lot of other people on Orkney. There we are, actually on Hoy. And I like this photograph. I hadn't realized when it was taken just how many different shades of blue there are in it. But that's us enjoying a rare moment of relaxation together on the island of Hoy. I do hope you've enjoyed listening, ladies and gentlemen. And I'll just remind you that the book will be on sale anytime now. You can order it in your usual way. And if there's any questions, if I can manage this technology, I'll be glad to answer them. I think I possibly have to stop screen sharing to do that. Lauren, do I have to stop screen sharing?
Yes, you do. You can.
There we go. That's Lauren. I'm glad she's there. She promised
Hello.
she would be there if I needed anything. Okay. Chat. Let's have a look. Right, I've got a list of questions from folk that have typed in during the talk. I'll try and answer as many as I can. I'm just reading this first one. This is from Jenny Damien, who says, "Is there any truth to acquisition of crofts owned by families that are in disrepair under the Scottish scheme to renovate these crofts with funding by the government?" Short answer to that, Jenny, is I don't know. I do know that if croft houses are in disrepair, even if they've fallen down completely, they can be rebuilt. You will automatically get planning permission to do it, but I confess I don't know the ins and outs of the rules that surround that. Let's have a look. Where else have we? What else have we got? Next question is from Roger Chambers. Oh, he said, "Interesting talk and good photos, but he has to leave now. Sorry." Okay. Jenny Damien again. "How much does it cost to take a ferry round trip just to go food shopping in Kirkwall if you live in Westray?" There are not grocery stores in Westray. There are grocery stores in Westray, Jenny. Obviously, they won't have the huge choice that the mainland shops have, but I think there are 3 or 4 grocery shops in Westray. And you can have boxes of food delivered from the supermarket, just as you can in the mainland supermarket, just as you can in the big cities. Cost, not sure of the exact cost. I know that islanders get a discount on the ferry. It doesn't seem to be a major issue. It's not something I hear people talk about. I think you have to plan. I think you maybe have to, plan a month or so ahead. People do shopping when they come to mainland for things like the dentist or the optician. She goes on, "There are no trees in Orkney either, so we need to buy wood for our fireplace." Well, there are trees in Orkney. They're just small. Yeah, if you want a wood burning stove, you would have to buy logs. How do people afford to go food shopping in Kirkwall and live on Westray? The ferries must be expensive. Well, obviously they're more expensive than if you didn't have to go on a ferry. That is something you have to factor in. I think it's worth saying that there's probably two ways of life, or two, I don't know whether you call it different ways of life. If you live on mainland Orkney, where 15,000 of the 22,000 people do live, your life and your access to services is pretty much the same as it would be in the UK mainland. When you move to the outer islands, particularly the smaller populations, there's a few hundred on Westray. I think about 600 live on Westray, but some of the outer islands have fewer than 100. There is no doubt you are living a different lifestyle, and you do have to factor in things like access to services, access to shops, travel, and so on. You can't get away from that. How does the hostel work for children with developmental disabilities who live on other islands and need to live in the hostel during the week? Again, I think you'd need to ask a specialist about that. I do know that there is very good support for children with special needs, but the exact details of it, you'd have to check. Emily Peggs or Pegs, enjoying this immensely, thank you. Let's have a look. I need to scroll down, see. From Sue Jackson, great talk, Richard. When is the best time to visit? Well, I think May and June, I always say to people, May and June are probably the best months, not just in Orkney, but in Scotland, for the weather, the wildlife. But, you know, we've had some fantastic weeks in February, November. The bird watching, for me, bird watching in the winter is easier than in the summer. There's huge flocks of wildfowl, which I enjoy, and they're easier to view. But I think you've got to be honest. 21st of December, we get about 6 hours of daylight. 21st of June, today, it'll barely get dark. And the weather is generally better in the summer. So, you know, you'd have to say the summer would be the best. And then Melissa Hutchings, who I believe I know. Hi, Melissa. If you were to visit Orkney for a few days, what would be your top places to visit? Ring of Brodgar, Skara Brae, Italian Chapel, Kirkwall, Stromness, Hoy, Papa Westray. Everywhere is great to visit. From Nick Hutchings, who I also think I know, who says, who would win a match between Orkney FC and Hull City? I think I'm going to be, what's the word, politic on that. And I think a draw. I think it might be a draw. Somebody said there was a talking newspaper section on Beverley's schedule. Would love to hear more about what this is. Talking newspaper is a service that puts the newspaper out, or extracts from the newspaper, put out in audio form for people who prefer to hear them in audio form. If you send me an email, I'll get Beverley to answer that in more detail for you. From Beverley Clubley, the very person has just written in to say there is excellent support for children with disabilities. I did some advocacy work in the schools and was very impressed with the individual support programs for all children. Now, I think that's got me to the end of the questions that have come in. Have I answered them all, Lauren, or are there more to do?
There's a couple more coming in from social media, so I'll just pop them in the chat for you just now.
New message. Beverley's added, the talking newspaper is for those who are partially sighted or blind. How do they access the talking newspaper, Beverly? Perhaps you'd like to type me a message to say how it's actually accessed. And in the meantime, there's a question coming in that says, are there any aspects of island life that you think could be adapted by the city, i.e. the sense of community? Good question. Yeah, I mean, we mustn't think that although we do, or islands do often come top of the polls for quality of life, we mustn't think that the islands are the only place where there's good community. There's hugely supportive communities in all parts of the UK. And we mustn't forget that. Aspects of island life that you think could be adapted to the city, sense of community. Well, I don't know. I don't think you have to live on an island, dear, to look after your neighbour. I think if I was to sum it up in one sentence, it would be that everybody I meet in Orkney treats me as though I was their neighbour. And I noticed that when I first came here, when we first came to live here. They treat me in a way that says, you know, I'm going to meet this guy again. And I want to get on with him, and I want to look after him, and hope he'll do the same for me. And I don't think you need to live in an island necessarily. Obviously, if you live in a big city, you're going to pass lots of people during the day that you're never going to see again. But in your street or your little community, then the opportunity for community support exists. And the opportunity for interacting with wildlife exists in most places, but you perhaps have to work at it a bit harder. All right, here's one. Has there been an observation about growing up on Orkney that has come from a student that you interviewed for a book that has stood out for you? Well, I said to you, the students always tell you the truth, and the responses have ranged from, I just got to get off this rock. I spoke to one 16-year-old in school who said, this is my last day in Orkney. I'm joining the army tomorrow and I'll be gone. But far more responses were of the type, you know, from students that didn't want to leave. They wanted to stay on the family farm, or if they left for education, they wanted to come back. I don't sense a great desire to leave from the vast majority of students. And well, all I can say is you have to read the book, because I've put quite a lot of verbatim accounts in the book from students, and many of them talk about the things that I've appreciated, you know, the scenery, the peace, the security, the community. What is the biggest revenue for the island? Don't know in money terms, but I guess farming is probably the biggest industry. I would say probably, I think that is farming. Farming first, tourism second, fisheries third, probably. Another message from Beverly about community. She's saying the vaccine marshalling and the cancer support that she's done, it's the same here as everywhere. If you want to be part of the community and make the effort. Do you have any advice for anyone thinking of making the switch from city to rural life? This is the last question from social media. Yes, very simply, come and have a look. There have been, I've heard a number of stories of people who've, particularly during COVID times, when city life has been difficult, they've seen life on the islands and it's appealed to them, and they've said, let's go and live in the island. And they've struck a pin in the map. And if the pin has landed on Orkney, they've sold the house, packed up their belongings in a van and set off to Orkney. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but I think it's a bit drastic personally. if you were thinking of moving to Orkney, I would come and have a look first and then make the decision yourself. Last question from Angela Percival, who I also know very well. Is Orkney more pro-independence or pro-union? Well, at the last referendum, Orkney and Shetland were the biggest pro-union voters, and I don't really see anything that's changed that. Well, that's it, ladies and gentlemen. I think that's the end of the questions. Thank you very much. Don't forget to buy the book when it becomes available to you, and I hope you enjoy it. And I think you'll find my email address at the back of the book. So if you've got any comments or questions when you've read it, please feel free to contact me. Thank you.